Take me to the sea, wash away my worries, let my soul be free. Take me to the ocean, take me to the sea, wash away my worries, let my soul be free.
Hello world, I'm Mhax. Back in IRL, I go by Curtis. Welcome to another episode of the State Copy Podcast. As always, I'll remind you to review episode 0 and its appended segments for terms, conditions, and disclosures applicable to the entirety of this content. Thank you. Well, hey everybody. Hope it's a happy, what are we on, Friday? Welcome to another exciting episode of Max's Global Financial Crisis 3 series. I think this episode I want to talk about a lot of conversations I'm having in my life all of a sudden. The herd, humanity, has become collectively concerned about everything that's happening right now. And a lot of people are asking me about it. And I figure that's excellent material for this show. So let's go through it. This is not going to be in any particular order. I've got some bullets here I'm going to try and stick to. And I'm just going to go through different conversations that I find myself happening in life. People curious about what's going on and, you know, wanting to give their thoughts. I feel like I have some folks in my life that want to listen, and I have some folks in my life that really want to tell me what's going on. And I have many thoughts about that. So this is going to be kind of I think this will be about an hour today. Please stay with me. If you want to be well informed on this, this is how you do it. I found it tremendously useful when I suddenly started becoming addicted to podcasts, because you know what's beautiful about podcasts? You cannot interrupt the host. If you enjoy the content, I feel like a lot of times a thing that I have noticed in life is so many of us are so anxious to prove our credentials and our knowledge on a given topic that when we want to have a conversation with somebody, I almost can't talk sometimes. I feel like everybody interrupts me after sometimes I can't even get to the second sentence I want to say, and somebody sort of talks over me and tells me what they think something is, even if they're asking me for my opinion. That's extremely frustrating. It becomes like an argument to try and just answer somebody's question they asked you. And so I find this long form podcasting to be just such a breath of fresh air. I can just say what I want to say, start to finish, and you really can't interrupt me. I mean, you can turn me off. That's fine. But I do study this stuff quite carefully. And not just me, a lot of these links I put in my description and these people I'm learning from, I listen to them start to finish, and in most cases. And I find that is how you know, that's how you learn stuff. You really got to just shut up and listen to somebody talk, and then think about it, process it, and then have a conversation about it, you know? So, please stick around. I think a lot of these are good. Let's just get right into it. So, let's see. A friend contacted me out of the blue, seeing, like I posted on Facebook, this content, and they listened to my show and they wanted to ask me questions. They could tell I knew a thing or two about crypto. And, I could tell that this guy basically went all in on what looks to be it's a Web3 certificate of deposit product built on Binance Smart Chain. So, and then I asked, and then I guess they're building their own chain for some reason. And that puts me immediately in a difficult spot because I'm this person's friend and I don't want to shit on their idea and I don't even know anything about it. But I've just seen so many projects like that making very large promises around like a certificate of deposit and type product that, is going to give you some compounding interest over time. I think it paid out at 4.5% or something. But with rates where they are today, that's not incredibly compelling. And you have to put up with counterparty risk of potentially some no name. So, my immediate reaction is I would have to know a heck of a lot more before I've just seen thousands of people trying to do something like what my friend was describing. And what makes me nervous about his approach is I think he's kind of put all of his all his eggs in one basket. And it's in one that isn't even one of the big safer names. He's not in one of the big, I don't think he even has a self-custodied Bitcoin allocation or a Ethereum or Solana allocation. And he's just put something into, and this is where I worry about people who get into crypto and they're just not pointed at the I've been looking very closely at crypto, everything, for almost 6 years. And I'm talking in the beginning, I was doing at least 20 hours a week of heavy research. And that's audiobooks, podcasts, long form. I know all of the major players in the industry. I know all of the really important problems in the picks and shovels layer. I know lots about the different protocols. And that knowledge was accumulated through hundreds of hours of careful study. And so you just can't replace that. I just don't think you can, you can't just listen to a few hour pitch and just, that's where I get nervous about people getting burned on crypto. And, but it's so difficult. It puts you in such a tough spot when your friend is all excited about something. I don't want to be like, I'm a know-it-all, I've got hundreds of hours on this, and how long have you? I don't want to do that. I really don't want to. I don't want to tell him I have serious concerns about that. I think he'll probably watch this video, and I would suggest, at minimum, some diversification in Web3. And if you look at my playbook episode in this GFC3 series, you'll see kind of how I'm doing it. And the way, like, I would try and get some weightings in some of those buckets I described, even in just liquid tokens, and just not be all in on a certificate of deposit sitting on Web3 rails. That makes me nervous. So, I don't know. I feel like we are, all of us who study crypto carefully, often put in a position to offer advice. Somebody will ask us what they think, but then I almost feel like they don't really want my opinion. They want me to tell them, you're right, your investment's going to work out okay. And I can't do that, and so I was kind of like, how do I change the subject? So yeah, I would say, education is extremely important. This space is so huge, and you'll hear a lot of people in this space who've spent some time here say like 97% of it is bullshit, and that's probably basically true. And it doesn't mean all of them are bad. Some of them are not bullshit or not even like overt scams. Some of them are just going to fail because they're competing with 100 other groups that might be better funded and or have just a more unique efficient approach to solving the problem. So, yeah, I'm not very bullish on Binance Smart Chain or third-party chains that are just trying to spin up right now. There's so much work that goes into a really good layer one, and it's too big for a small team. And I don't understand creating your own blockchain for just one product to sit on top of. The beauty of this stuff is the composability of it. You create a unique DeFi primitive that a whole bunch of other software and DeFi things can grab onto and utilize. And if you're just off on your own little private chain that needs its own custom on and off rails, I don't know that that's going to work. So I'm not very bullish those things. I think mostly I'm looking at things building on layer ones that can scale, that are actually decentralized. And I only really see one player there. So that's everything I think, man. And anybody else who is listening. Let's see. Another friend. So a friend just calls me out of the blue today and wanted to hear. This is a guy I worked with at my last job, and he's a PhD and just brilliant dude, and like a medical doctor, but like some of my finance stuff is stuff that he hasn't optimized for. So he's hit me up for, thoughts. And he's somebody who is really carefully listening. It's much easier to have the conversation with somebody who will let me talk. So thank you, man. I'm going to call him Friend H. So we talked at length about sort of stuff that was in my playbook episode. And he told me like sort of parts of his story where he, right around 2021, he got orange pilled and, he found Michael Saylor and a lot of the, I'm guessing, what's his name? The big dude, big, well-spoken dude. He lifts. Can't remember his name. But brilliant guy. Man, that's going to frustrate me. He's got the What is Money show, I want to say. He bought at sort of the top of Bitcoin, and he went in with a sizable position, and then, we've corrected down. So he's sitting on 1/3 of his original amount. He's done enough of the homework to understand how the market works. He's not crushed about it, but he's basically found himself in a place where he's bouncing along the bottom, and he still has all the conviction, but he realizes he chose his entry. None of us, when we go in, we all get burned like that because you don't really know enough. And I mean, I was lucky in that crypto got my attention in 2017 because of everything it was doing. And I didn't actually buy any until winter was fully in. So I didn't really buy in until we were kind of in this phase of the last cycle. So I just lucked out in my timing. Like crypto got my attention in just such a way that I got myself good and educated and ready to onboard. And I figured out the rails when they were much more complicated. But I was in a winter. So I really think that guy is going to be just fine. I think that we talked a little bit about the Balaji bet. We both listened to a few of Balaji's shows that he's done. He's kind of done a media frenzy with his bit signal. I think that was cool. I think it was good marketing for a good cause. And I think that mostly it's like a publicity stunt. I don't, who can say? I linked in my last episode, The Changing World Order, Ray Dalio's. I got it right here. It's an hour long. No, it's 43 minutes long. This is 43 minutes of vital information. Okay, just YouTube. I'll link it again in the description of this episode. Just watch this. This is a brilliant dude. So, I didn't read this last time. So let's say Ray Dalio wiki. Ray Thomas Dalio, born August 8th, 1949, is an American billionaire investor and hedge fund manager who served as the co-chief investment officer of the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates. You don't get that job unless you really know your shit. Okay? This is not some weird YouTuber. This is Ray effing Dalio. He put together a 43-minute clip that summarizes a lot of the content you'll get from, there's a book called The Fourth Turning, and it just describes the cyclicality of global world order and monetary systems. And he does it he hired an animation team to do it in a really, it's really accessible. This dummy found his for dummies on that, really it made sense. Watch that. If you want to know what's going on, it really says it well. So basically, the inevitability of the Eurodollar, a transition from the Eurodollar to something else, cannot be questioned. It's all just it's remarkable how long it's lasted and how much how much more we're getting out of it. And everybody wants to say, "Oh, you're never going to get the government." You're a fool to think. People give the U.S. government, just governments in general, all of them, we tend to think of them like they were when we were children, and they're just not that anymore. They've become sort of decayed and overtly dysfunctional, and kind of in a way where everybody knows it. That's where confidence in a system is eroded when enough of people start seeing that it's flawed. And we're in that space now. So that's why it's not silly when you hear a Bitcoiner talking about magic internet money. It's because they spent, potentially, I'm not going to say they all have, but the most ardent supporters of that have just looked very closely at the Eurodollar and seen the inevitability of its eventual collapse. I mean, there are a few magic things that could happen with our technology. We're coming into a time where AGI is such a disruptive force. You can't imagine. It's so deflationary. Everything's going to get so cheap because, especially if we get fusion figured out in the next 15 years and AGI, artificially generated super intelligence, something way beyond us, everything becomes abundant. Everything's cheap. And that means we need to reinvent how society works. It's not going to be this old system, and it's not going to be a fight. I'm talking to you now on a really cheap TV studio that I made for myself, and I upload this for free, and a company makes money off my content. So we can all talk to each other. Nobody's ever been able to do this in our history. So I think this is an exciting time that I find to be just brilliant fun. It's such a good time to watch and see how it all plays out. And I find myself way more excited than I am anything else. So when I tell you that the Eurodollar, the thing that we all trade in, is going to fail, eventually, I think we're going to find a way to do it in a safe, smooth transition where it just kind of happens. I don't think we have to do it like we've done it in the past. I'm not a doomer. This is all going to work. Everything's fine. We're going to be okay. That's me. And it's largely because of our technology and all of this wonderful innovation. So, if you want to understand the times we're in and you want to be truly informed, start here. Watch it, because until you understand the cyclicality of global world orders and how this is something that, if you look into our history of geopolitics and economics, you just see it happening over and over and over again. It beats to almost the exact same rhythm. And when you understand that Wall Street basically works off these rhythms of like liquidity cycle, it's all there. You just have to sit and listen to it. All right. So, okay. I was listening to my friend talk about this, and the thing I wanted to say about it was, I can relate to him wanting to tell his, when he figured it out and became convinced enough this was something important he should do, he told his father, and his father listened to his son because his father respects his son. His son is a powerful human that is worthy of listening to. And then he didn't panic sell. He still got everything that he bought, and I'm pretty convinced he's going to do just fine. I'm still making many of those bets. I timed my purchase a little bit different on that one, but that's because I've got a lot more experience than his dad did going in, or that he did on his first one. And that's fine. We all do that. As long as you learn from as long as you don't get pissed off at yourself about it, and you just go, oh, there's some really valuable information I can take from that experience and integrate so that I can use that in the future for insane gains. Because all of their fundamentals work was spot on. I mean, like they did the right thing. They just bought at the wrong time. Markets fluctuate with the liquidity cycle. And at the time, I wouldn't have known that as well. Like, I learned most of macro and all of this kind of stuff that I'm talking about, Ray Dalio's work, in just the last year. So even though I've felt fairly expert in crypto, I didn't know a thing about this. Now, this is such vital context for everything. So go watch this. I mean it. All right. Also, Ray Dalio did a 60-minute. He did a spot on 60 Minutes, and I'll try and find that and put it in the description, where he's interviewed about this changing world order. And right now, that's the #1 New York Times bestselling macro book. It's really good. There's a book, or you can just watch his 43-minute cartoon. It's great. All right. I'm done selling Ray's books for him. All right. Let's see. In closing, I want to say I have learned that I don't feel comfortable, even though I have such high conviction around this stuff, I don't feel comfortable telling my friends or loved ones. I helped a couple friends make some money. And I steered him right at the right time, but I know at least one guy who got burned on one of my, basically because he got in about the same time as friend H here, and he'll be fine too as long as he doesn't panic sell. I'm still very confident in all of the fundamentals work that I did there. But because I can never see exactly how the chart's going to look, no matter how good my fundamentals game is, I've learned that I don't feel comfortable. All I will do is tell you authentically what I'm going to do and how I'm going to play it here. Take what you want from it. But you can't blame me if something doesn't pan out. I don't get to blame anybody for my trades. Neither do you. When you click buy or sell on anything, you own that. And if you don't, you will always fail. If you can't own your failures, then you you don't get to own your successes. So in this trading game and investing and all that. All right. So moving on. A cousin, I can tell that humans are freaking out right now over this. I mean, I called it GFC3 on day one, and I thought I might be being a little bit overzealous, but no, it's now that I've got cousins tagging me in posts and I'm getting a couple calls a day, people are thinking about this stuff. So my cousin tags me in a post, and here's what he wrote. I'm going to read the whole thing out. There's 3 parts to it, and then I'm going to respond long form. He writes, the derivatives market caused the 2008 financial crisis. Dodd-Frank barely touched it. It's over 10 times larger than the stock market and much more reactive to market / economic conditions. It's where the boogeyman lives. Last time I looked into this, the federal government, via the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, if you take a peek under the hood, really has very little sense of systemic risk to the economy from the derivatives market. It's where we don't know. It's where we don't know what we don't know, and where the biggest risk of global financial meltdown will come from as a result of catalyzing bond market problems. I think, yeah. Okay, let me just finish reading this. I suppose a more specific question for one of his friends, he links, was percent of the current derivatives market is composed of what were dubbed swaps 15 years ago. What percent of the derivatives market actually has any kind of tracking at all, let alone analysis by regulators? And then he goes on to say, and a more specific question to me, he tags, how likely do you think it is that the CFTC has anywhere close to the computing power and staff levels to track all or even most of the trading in the derivatives markets? How likely is it that they have the computing and staff power to analyze liquidity and solvency of systemically impactful economic entities, big and regional banks, insurance companies, investment banks, hedge funds, etc., with respect to trading trends and derivative market positions? He says, am I wrong in this assessment? Anybody? I have many thoughts on this. But when he messaged me this yesterday, I just smoked a joint. I was in no position to answer with anything coherent. So, first, let's talk about derivatives. So, derivatives that's such a big thing that you're talking about. So, I guess that's just options, everything. That's all these, honestly, I don't want to say that I'm the biggest expert in derivatives or options or these like complex financial instruments like mortgage-backed security. I mean, like I have a broad understanding of how most of it works, but the finer points, I don't find it that interesting, so I don't specialize in it. My understanding of the derivatives market is, so in a lot of ways it's insurance, right? So derivatives were created initially, like options are a vital tool that markets must have. Like it's not a thing, this isn't something Wall Street created to scam all of us out of our money. This is for like if you're a farmer and you need to buy fertilizer next year and you need to plan what that's going to cost, you need to buy options so that you can lock in the price of fertilizer today, in case especially when we're in this inflationary environment that we're in, and with all the shocks that are happening specifically in the fertilizer market because of Russia-Ukraine. Russia is a huge supplier of, I think it's potash. I can't remember. Derivatives allow producers to lock in prices for their inputs of their business. If you have some sort of commodity that you need in order to produce your widget or to farm your fields, you have to be able to lock in a price. Otherwise, if suddenly the price is 3x and you don't have a budget for it, you can only plant 1/3 of your field. So derivatives serve a vital function for markets, and they have to be there. Now, where we get into trouble is where they do silly things like they did. So back in 2008, what happened was, as I understand it, because we were in that part of the liquidity cycle where we were way out, everybody was risk on, everybody was like getting lots of encouragement from their governments to lend and go way out on the risk curve. And so much good came out of that. If you're open-minded for a sec, if you look at how many people were fucking starving in China and India and around the world and parts of Africa before we did all of this, like so much good came out of this. If you look at it, all of life is perception. And if you look at all of the good that came out, like I can tell my cousin is pissed off when he read this, like he's read this thing and he sees a big scary thing in the derivatives market. And I can tell he's tuned up and he's worried that Wall Street's going to do it to him again. All humans are just another version of you with a collection of different life experiences. And so I don't know, I'm immune to anger, and I just watch these things. And when I study them, like so mortgage-backed securities was this big bucket of bad loans that they bundled together back in like 2005, 2006 at the peak of the housing boom. But then they stamped them AAA quality because historically everybody paid their mortgages. And that was a new experiment, blowing up house values like 3x or more in certain geos, to where we'd never really seen that. And that's where you got a lot of those bad behaviors. When I see those things, I just don't, I really am like immune to anger, and I find blame useless and fear mostly useless. Like healthy fear is okay, but I don't know. More on that later. Specifically, another thing to keep in mind about the derivatives is there's somebody on both sides of every trade, and there's a bunch of circuit breakers in place. So now derivatives are used in Forex and stuff like that. People take a position that lets them delta neutral, or it favors one side of, like, you could take I heard the macro guys doing, I think it was short euro, long Mexican peso, I want to say it was, and did actually really well I think that was like 6 months ago. There's all these ways you can use options to mitigate risk. And it looks like a huge market, but you don't realize that there's somebody, whenever you trade a derivative, there's somebody on the other side of that. And there's an automated circuit breaker in between them that liquidates the loser's position should they run out of cash to fund it. So a lot of it is really vital to how our economy works, and serves a really useful function for hedging risks for producers and for banks. And you really can't just think of it as a big box of evil waiting to run over the little guy. I don't think that's right. And then as far as CFTC, I got a buddy, friend B, Mr. Big, now we're calling him, when I read from OK We Cool, who's also thinks in this way. Like, if there's a failure, it's because we didn't make a good enough set of rules or regulatory body to monitor it. But when I look closely at the CFTC and the SEC and all these things, I think we have enough rules. And I think that the ones we have, when I look at these governing bodies, they fuck everything up. They're wildly inefficient. Some of them are great. Some of them get it really good. I don't want to say all rules are bad. I'm not one of these people who says, oh, free market, everything. Sometimes you have to get it, especially when it comes to things like polluting the environment and stuff. Like, you can't just say give corporations a free rein with no controls, or they will just dump waste in drinking water and stuff like that. Ironically, though, what we do is we just farm that work to somebody, to like what we did in the 90s and early 2000s is we set up all those EPA rules, and then we just went and got China to do it for us and pollute their shit. So, I just think when a small collection of humans gets in and says, oh, I know what a rule we could make that will make everything better, they usually don't understand the second and third order consequences of that one that they made. And then what happens inevitably is a whole bunch of regulators start getting, like, that's how they make their money, is doing that important rule enforcement. And it becomes this dysfunctional bureaucracy that whole markets spring up to take advantage of and exploit. So I'm not saying that we should go lawless. I'm not an anarchist. I think that there are some places where it's appropriate. But I think when I look carefully without an accusatory when I'm not looking at like who's trying to F me over, and I just look at it, a lot of times I find that these things are just, they serve a vital function. Lots of what they get done right. But mostly what'll happen is if somebody's doing something fraudulent, somebody sees it. Like that guy I called out in the Bulls and the Bears episode. What's his name? I can't remember. He's the guy who spotted FTX. Somebody will spot it, and then they'll short the hell out of the company that's got the problem. Markets are actually, this is the thing. So I was a guy who, right alongside my cousin, my good friend, Mr. Big, who thought, corporations are evil, and whenever there's a problem, it's because it's a failure of regulatory. And I never did the research. I never went and looked. I never went and with an open mind and listened to these free market, all I heard and saw was, I was like Bernie, what's his name? Sanders. Yeah. Oh, the corporates, they're all evil. They're going to take our money, and they make way too much money, and their greed is good. That's what they all think. They're all evil. Don't listen to them. Well, that's bullshit. You got to do the work. You got to go look at how markets function. You got to look at how probably a good many of the jobs that you've had in your life were from big corporations that were part of that machine. The reason you have food in your store, the reason that your electric comes on is because of this big evil machine. It's not, there's no good and evil. There's just a bunch of humans doing as best they can, and we're all very imperfect, and we're subject to flawed character at times, where we will accept personal benefit over the whole. And usually that fails. And I'm just, I guess I'm okay with it. I forgive them. I'm not going to let it make me mad anymore. And if you go do all this research, you'll find out that huge parts of this are imperfect because they're trying to do something really hard, and we're using the human collective like mood to guide global risk on, risk off behaviors, and it's cyclical. It follows a sine curve. And basically, when times are good, everything's good. We risk on, baby. You know, it's easy to get a loan, and it seems like every bet you make goes up. And then we do that for a certain period of time, and then everybody gets scared, and the money dries up, and liquidity gets sucked out of the system. When that happens, the ones that were taking the biggest risks, some of them weren't bad guys or gals. They took a risk that didn't work out. They tried a business that was never going to work in the beginning, and it failed. When the money dried up and there was no income, it died. And then maybe they weren't able to pay back a loan. And then this cascades. Then the person that made the loan to them, who was serving a vital function of creating capital for a new business, was penalized. And if they had, all of this is that. It's all just like it's a big, complicated thing where if you're just looking for an evil boogeyman, like I think my cousin says, this is where the boogeyman, there is no boogeyman. There's just flawed, imperfect humans who occasionally do some evil shit. But usually it's just taking a little bit more risk, and we celebrate them when they take their risk and it works and it makes something we thought was impossible possible. But then in that time where you flip the coin and it doesn't come up the way they need it to, it's not appropriate to just go out. They are you. We're all the same thing. All right. Next one. So I had another friend call me yesterday, and we talked for a long time about small to mid-tier banks. Now, I mentioned in my last video that I was a little spooked about that. And I decided I looked at the probabilities, I measured the risk versus reward, and I decided to go ahead and move some liquid cash I had from like a credit union over to like a big bank. I created the accounts, but I kept running into problems trying to get the transfer working, not because of any blockages or anything like that. Like I just didn't have the wiring instructions, or when I tried to do the electronic transfer, I went over the limit. I got that forced enough time for me to think it through, and I decided I'm not going to do it. So if you watch the collection of videos I've linked in this series, there is some cause for concern in small to mid-tier banks. But I don't want to be a part of a run on banks. We're in a fractional reserve banking system, and the small to mid-tier banks have to succeed. And when I think it through, Janet Yellen and the Fed, they're not going to have the option to not make depositors whole. I mean, banks might go out of business, like investors, but credit unions, I think everybody's a member. So, and there's like a board, and yeah, I don't know. I just think if you force a bunch of banks who are not liquid, who served a vital function for all of our communities, like if you have an auto loan, you probably don't have it through one of the big four. You probably have it through a smaller or mid-tier bank because you're considered too far out on the risk curve. You couldn't buy your car without them. Now, I think auto loans and commercial real estate is a huge risk right now. And that's what made me think maybe I should move this, because that's where small banks do most of their business. It's mostly in two of these segments where I think there's some of the most risk right now. And here are the reasons for that. So '08, this thing we're facing right now, I think is bigger than '08. I'll just say it. I think this is a bigger crisis that we face, but it's different. There are a whole bunch of different, and people will say, oh, it's not going to be as big as '08 because the banks have, their liquidity requirements were elevated after '08, Dodd-Frank, things like that. But the reason I say that I think this one's bigger is because, well, we've been in a depression. If you go back to some of my earlier shows, I think one of the globally what happens whenever a new recession or depression occurs is the people that don't want to call it that come up with a new definition for what one is. Just every time. So after '08, I think we've basically been in a period of sustained below trend GDP. So if you chart the United States and if you chart global GDP, you get a line that's just moving in this direction. And then after '09, it drops down. And then when it comes back up, it doesn't continue on the same path. So it just gets on the sustained below trend. And that is the old textbook definition of a depression. But like I said before, it's a really nice depression. We have abundant, cheap food. We have, you can go to Walmart and buy a $300 pretty awesome TV, plug it into a Netflix, an Xbox, and basically be entertained for cheap. And so I think our technical innovation has made this just so much nicer than the last time we went through it. And I think the dramatic crescendo that we're working towards could actually be nice too. Like it could work out. Like I'm not very gloom and doom about these things. I mean, the scariest thing is Russia, Ukraine, and that escalating in some way. Like that's how normally these things play out, is that would escalate and we'd go into some sort of global thing. I see all kinds of escape routes from that, though, that we never had before. And so I'm super optimistic. But in markets and where I see risk this time, I think '08 was the big banks failing because of those mortgage-backed securities getting AAA rated and then being traded. And then it was like a game of musical chairs. Whoever got caught with the paper when the music stopped collapsed. And that was Bear Stearns and Lehman. And was it AIG, the one that was doing the credit default swaps? And that's actually what my cousin was talking about, those swaps, those credit default swaps. This one's different. This one's going to be more like the credit unions and the smaller banks because they're the ones that were lending to commercial. And like it or not, we're not going back to the way things used to be. I think most of those big office buildings you see, if you're in Silicon Valley or if you're in, any big city, we're not going back to the office. For a variety of reasons. It's not just because people are lazy and like to watch Netflix or whatever they do and pretend they're working, go bump the mouse on their laptop every few. I mean, there was certainly that. The silent quitters, they called them. People had a right to feel that way, by the way. Everybody who wanted to make those people out to be awful people. Where was the inspiration to try? COVID was sucked. We were all locked in our houses. It was incredibly depressing. And we were made to worry about our kids and ourselves. And there was all this tension socially between friends, stopped talking to each other, and our politics blew up. I mean, it was a shitty time. You know, of course people didn't want to be, you know, super motivated to build the bullshit thing that your company makes, that is about to get completely disrupted. I mean, the thing I was working on for a year, I worked really hard. Even during that time, I didn't silent quit. I was working, God, towards the end there was like right during COVID, I was having like some 50-hour weeks and stuff. It was incredibly demanding while I was taking care of a 3-year-old behind me. I had to get my housekeeper to agree to help me with childcare, because it was also hard to get even somebody to do that because everybody's so afraid of COVID. It was a ridiculously hard time. Oh my gosh, man. Anyways, I get distracted. All of that work I did just got thrown out. I know that the company, I looked at their chart. I knew they were going to lay me off. I've talked about that before. It's why I quit. It's why I started this sabbatical. They laid everybody off, and they're not going to rehire and build that thing up. That thing I poured my life blood into for 3 years, 5 years, 3 years, I think. Meaningless. It's not okay to, and anybody who I was working with who was able to silent quit under those circumstances because their job wasn't as demanding, I'm not upset or resentful of them. Of course, I would have if I could have gotten away with it, you know? Well, I think that people who want to work full-time remote they're going to have to figure out ways to make that more possible, but I think that's going to be more and more possible to get, you know, and there are ways when everybody's engaged to know who's not engaged, at least in my business. In software, if you're in a well-operating Scrum team, you'll know right away when somebody's not pulling their weight. And but my problem is I think software is just, I think GPT-4, GPT-5, whatever that looks like, this thing's growing in exponentials. And when I look at what it can do just for my DevOps work, I mean, I don't even know why you'd need to hire me for what I used to do. I mean, the managerial stuff and the sort of more mundane parts of my work might not be just scriptable yet. Here's the thing. ChatGPT, even GPT-4, ChatGPT-4 is not perfect yet, but I've had it build Python scripts for me that can do all kinds of awesome shit. And with very little, you know, correcting, like we just go back and forth with a few prompts, and pretty soon I got something that used to take me a couple days to do. And I can do it in just writing a few sentences. My dad could do that. Why hire me? You know, this is so disruptive, and I don't think people understand it. So, and here's the bigger thing. Like, it's bigger than the jobs. It's also the office building that nobody's going to go back and work at. So when the lease comes up, people aren't going to renew, and then that building's going to sit empty, and without the revenues, if they have loans, it's just going to take time for that to play out. It's why it hasn't happened yet, but it's going to. There's no reason for anybody to go back in. In many of our case, in software, you go look for a job, you might be having a bit of a hard time. A lot of us have been laid off. But the knock-on effects, like, it hurts more than just the software engineer. It hurts the local, the restaurant below we weren't in a WeWork. We were in something else that was like WeWork, one of these shared workspaces. We didn't renew. And now we're not going to the 3 restaurants right below it at lunch every day. They all get hurt. And it just takes time. And A lot of us are like in our social life, eating out, and restaurants are booming, and it's hard to keep those places employed. And until we get a dexterous robot, until you get probably Optimus Robot version 3 or 4, probably in less than 10 years, those might be the only jobs you can get. I mean, I'm thinking about handiwork type stuff I could do if I needed to go back and work, because I just feel like, I don't know. I mean, if I go look for a job now, I think I can go find one and it'll last for approximately 6 to 12 months, but then I'm going to be back in the same spot. And there's so many jobs like that. Accounting, tons of stuff, the administrative shit that's in medical. These robots are going to do it so much better and so much, and they don't charge. So what's cool though is that is all very deflationary. Everything we buy, even though we have this inflation spike right now, should get way cheaper when you don't have to pay all of us to do the job. That's the good news. But we are going to have a moment where we have to reinvent how the entire world order and this entire machine of how we all work and feel like what we're doing matters. That's very important for a happy human. Feeling like you're doing something productive with your time is vital. I think we should all do this. One of the reasons I do this is I think this is the future. I think creating unique, interesting content that is you, and sharing it with the cloud and partnering with AGI to do it in a lot of different ways. I can't wait till I can just go for a walk, lay out what I want to say in a show, and then just pass it off to my much more advanced Mhax to generate an episode of my show that looks indiscernible from this. I think less than 5 years away. Definitely. Especially with all this pre-work I've done. So, figure out, we can all be YouTubers. Let's do it. All right. All right, everybody. I decided to make this episode a two-parter. I feel like I want to stick to the original hour that I specified. And so I'm going to pick up a part 2 and release it tomorrow that continues. I'll pick up right at the end of the conversation about small and mid-tier banking and transition to this new one on Okay We Cool, talking about chlorine. All right. To everybody listening, you're the coolest, and I will definitely get this part 2 out tomorrow. Thank you.
Now it's coming around, you're feeling cut down and in the ground, and so we all come together. We making a sound, we sing. Look at all this love we found. Gotta raise some more toast to the sweet life. I feel strong, I wanna be right. See the sun giving me the green light. Kick back, relax, and soak up the sweet sights. Take me to the ocean, take me to the sea. Wash away my